Now here I have a 2020 Vauxhall Corsa, though you'd be forgiven for not recognising it, especially from the rear. It's grown and become a distinctly different shape to the familiar Corsa shape we've grown to recognise over the last 10 years or so. Its road presence has changed too. It's shorter than it was, while being wider and longer, giving it a squatter appearance on the road. And while it does still have familiar Vauxhall styling cues such as the crease down the centre of the bonnet and the LED lights in the familiar Vauxhall shape, it's a different car. It's grown, but is it more mature?
When it comes to being more mature, Group PSA, Vauxhall Opel's parent company, would certainly like you to think so. The Corsa F was hastily redesigned after the French group acquired Opel back in 2017 with a completely updated body and underpinnings. The previous generations of Corsa, Corsa D and E both used the same platform from General Motors, with only minor body revisions and facelifting from 2006 through to 2019 when this Corsa F was released. The lines on the car are classier and it has a more practical size, shape and layout. Some fat has been trimmed too. This generation is around 108 kilograms lighter than the previous one.
It is more mature when it comes to technology. I have the key in my hand, but I don't actually need it to get inside the car. I can just push a button and the boot will open. I can also just tap here and it unlocks and lets me in. It definitely feels more grown up on the inside. The cabin is less incremental upgrade so much as a radical redesign. It's a much nicer place to be than the previous generation of Corsa, with fancier materials and a much better layout. Generally, the places you put your hands in the interior are quite nice. The steering wheel feels good, the seats are quite a comfortable material, and the door cards generally are actually quite good as well. However, there are certain areas which aren't great. The plastic on the door cards at the top is very scratchy and it does come down near the handle, so every time you get out and get in, you might feel that. The gear stick, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag for me. The shape of it is quite unconventional, but surprisingly, when you're driving, it does actually feel quite nice and fit well in the hand. However, the material on it is not the best. The plastic where you put your fingers it's not scratchy, but it feels cheap. The same goes for the top of the dash as well. Yes, it's slightly squidgy, but it's got that awful scratchy sound when you run your fingers over it. The climate controls are positioned below the 7-inch infotainment screen. This system is acceptable for 2020. There is a slight delay between you tapping something and the reaction of the system, but it does offer both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so you don't actually have to use the inbuilt navigation and radio functions. You can just plug in via USB down at the bottom and you're good to go.
The technology theme continues externally, with power folding mirrors, front and rear parking sensors, forward collision warning, lane keep assist, auto just about everything and LED lamps all round. Having driven this car for a few days, I can confidently say that auto full beam LED headlights are fantastic. As mentioned before, externally the design has matured. The front end looks purposeful and the gloss black roof and B-pillar add a touch of class.
All models of this car are 5 doors. There's no choice about that, which means you are technically getting a more practical car. However, because the rear door has quite a narrow opening, it does mean that the back seats are best suited for children. There is a reasonable amount of space back here once you're in. I'm not the tallest of humans, but I do have enough knee room. However, headroom is a slight issue. I'm only about 5'7", 5'7.5", and my head does nearly touch the ceiling here. I've got maybe a couple of inches room to spare, so anyone in the 6 foot region, forget about being in the back of this car.
The boot is a practical size and shape, but at 309 litres it lags behind the capacity of the VW Polo's 351 litres. The driver's instrument cluster is fully digital, although the screen doesn't quite fill the entire binnacle, so it feels like you're missing something.
Certain elements of the interior are fantastic. This armrest is brilliant. It slides out to exactly the right position, and you do actually get a small amount of storage inside it. However, it is an optional extra. Starting this car is a process which takes longer than it would with a traditional key. I guess that's one of the slight negatives of having a keyless entry and go system. The ride is perfectly refined. At low speeds and round town, you will not have an issue with how the suspension deals with bumps and imperfections in the road. The brakes are engaging too. They bite well and are quite sensitive to your input. The engine is certainly peppy enough too. When you put your foot down, you do feel it, and there is a surprising amount of torque given it's only a 3-cylinder. There's even a sport button down here, which when you press it, seems to pipe a little bit more noise through the speaker system. It does, however, increase the throttle response too, so when that dynamic mode is activated, your input to the throttle does actually receive a bit of a sharper response. However, the main letdown of this car and the driving experience is the engine. As a 3-cylinder engine, it's inherently unbalanced. When you're sitting in stationary traffic, idling, you can feel the vibrations of the engine coming through. Also, pulling away is not a nice process. Because of the 3 cylinders, you don't get a smooth application of power, so it's slightly juddery and jerky, and it doesn't feel like the rest of the experience in the car would suggest it should. Once you're moving, however, no complaints really. You do have to row the gearbox slightly more than would be ideal, and I think that comes down to the fact that the torque and power available from this engine aren't quite enough when you're in a higher gear to get you up to speed if you've had to slow down slightly, so you do find yourself having to drop down a couple of gears. The digital gauge cluster is quite a nice addition. It does add an element of premium to the interior of the car. However, it feels slightly underutilized. It doesn't actually have many configurable options and seems to only serve the purpose of displaying trip information, the speed limit, which is quite a useful feature, your speedometer, and your rev counter. At higher speeds, it's remarkably well composed. The car sits quite planted on the road, and you're easily able to place it where you need to. One luxury this car has is a heated steering wheel, which does seem like a slight unnecessary thing, but today it is a little bit chilly, and actually it's quite nice. Couple that with the heated seats and fully automatic climate control, and actually you can just set a temperature and forget about it. The car will do the rest, which does make it quite a comfortable experience just sitting in this cabin driving along. A roads and B roads in this car are actually surprisingly fun. The chassis is quite engaging and the steering is relatively direct and has a decent amount of weight to it when you're going. So it's actually quite chuckable. You can throw it into corners and it will grip and go round. However, it does actually feel like the chassis has a little bit more to give, which suggests that this chassis with a higher power engine might actually be quite a good vehicle to drive.
This model though, it's best suited as a town car, with the occasional longer distance trip in mind. It rides well on urban roads and is a pretty decent all-rounder. It's well equipped, practical, reasonably spacious and quite competent. This specific trim level comes in at over 20k, and for that kind of money you'd expect better materials all round and a more pleasant driving experience than this engine and slightly sloppy gearbox has to offer. Fuel economy could be better too. I only managed in the mid to high 30s miles per gallon in mixed driving. The steering is light, so the vehicle can be threaded past parked cars, but this lightness can lead to an uninspiring driving experience. Couple that with the disappointing drivetrain, maybe the electric model's the one to go for.
Is it mature though? Not quite. In a lot of respects, it's a remarkable improvement over the previous generation. It's just let down by a few key areas such as the engine and certain aspects of the interior. Yes, it's a very good car, but it's not quite up there with the best in the class.